Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Reconnection Podcast. I am Dr. Lynn, joined by Dr. Jordan Maxwell. Today, we are going to talk about herbalism, and we're going to discover and explore and understand herbalism from both of our perspectives and also our training and deep dive into Chinese herbalism, different herbalist wisdom traditions that we have embarked on and learned from, and we're going to talk about it in this episode today. So, Jordan, let's dive in. How did you get into herbalism and how has it changed your life?
It's a great question because when we were posing this in the beginning there, I was like, I don't remember the answer to this question. So I had to take a second to really think about that. And I think that I've always been, let's take it really far back. I've always been interested watching movies where they're mixing herbs and potions and things along those lines. Even something as simple as Harry Potter, and Professor Snape's class making a potion there. So it's always
Oh my
something that
God.
the
Yes.
pop culture topic of it has been interesting to me, but as an actual true discipline and something that was concrete in my reality, it wasn't until
Mm-hmm.
way later on in life, like my early 20s or so, that I realized herbalism A is a real thing, because of course my references I just used were fictional, and then B,
Mm-hmm.
as such an effective thing too, because I was diagnosed loosely with celiacs, probably in my late teens, and tried a lot of different things to mitigate digestive health stuff. And it wasn't until I was in chiropractic school seeing a Chinese herbalist that I ever had gotten relief from my symptoms whatsoever. My symptoms consisted of just constant chronic pain in the abdomen region, including waking up every morning like somebody was gutting me, like stabbing pains there. I
Wow.
experienced that probably from 12 to 22, and just kind of thought everyone's stomach wakes them up in the morning that way, that's just normal
Yeah,
physiology,
this is totally normal.
Absolutely. So I remember when I first started with these Chinese herbals, I had a few mornings where I woke up with just a little grumble, nothing too crazy, and then I realized, wow, that is not a normal process. And it was super interesting, and I didn't know at the time the connection, but at the exact same time, my allergies and asthma started plummeting and disappearing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it was with that herbalist in my Cairo school that I went from these excruciating pains, very high allergies, just completely congested every morning, spitting stuff up, and mild asthma symptoms. And within 6 months' time, almost no recognition of any of those symptoms. So
Wow.
a pretty dramatic change in experience. And it's something I still have to look back now with gratitude, because we're both always trying to perfect our health and trying to make ourselves as optimally healthy as well. And sometimes I still
Yeah.
get stuck on these little things that aren't improved or aren't doing better. And I have to go back
Mm-hmm.
to that time and really remind myself, I was in such a deeply terrible place in my late teens, early 20s, that these practices really have gotten me so incredibly far. So
Mm.
you don't have to have as dramatic of a story as I do, as I typically do. But what was your introduction into herbalism? I'm gonna assume it was probably a little bit earlier in life.
Yes, it was. And, my earliest form of learning herbalism was through my mom, actually. And this was, when I was a kid and growing up and going into the kitchen and smelling, Asian herbs, like Chinese herbs, when you're cooking them, it can smell, you know that someone's cooking them because it fills up the entire house, fills up the entire space, and you're like, someone's cooking herbs, you
Yeah,
know?
that smell still makes my husband mad. I know what you mean.
Yeah, yeah. If you know, you know. So I would go into the kitchen when I was like, young, 4 or 5, and just have these questions in my mind, like, what are you doing? What are you cooking? What is this for? Why are you drinking this? And my mom would just tell me, oh, I'm drinking it because of, heat in your body or wind in your body. And she would put herbs in my food and just always talk to me about what was happening in my body, especially when I was like sick and I grew up having asthma and like a lot of different skin conditions and stuff. So she always talked to me about what was happening. And I think early on, I just kind of had that frame of mind that like you heal with food, you heal with herbs, you heal with plants. And also at the same time, I grew up in such a dualistic frame of understanding the world and medicine because at the same time I would go to the doctor and go to a Western doctor. Like my mom would take me to go in and go get an inhaler for my asthma and go get like cream for my eczema and all these things. And so I had both of those views of medicine and the world and how to treat the body and how to take care of the body in my life very, very early on. And I think that it's funny going full circle and studying Chinese medicine because it's not only just acupuncture, it is the Chinese herbalism. I mean, Chinese herbalism is a huge part of that. So I definitely feel like early on, that's how I learned about herbalism. But it wasn't until like obviously later I got into the doctorate program and started diving deep into Chinese herbalism. But now, like, I can have those conversations with my mom and be like, yeah, that thing is clearing hate in your body. And that thing is, gonna move your chi and tonify your blood, like all those things that she would always talk to me about. So I think it's a really beautiful full circle moment.
Yeah, no, and it's
Yeah.
funny you say that too, because actually our doctorates in Chinese medicine, a lot of people forget that that includes acupuncture, herbalism, cupping, gua sha, all these things. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, believe it or not, most people are brought to the program due to acupuncture, but it's actually the
Yeah.
opposite for me. I was brought to the program due to herbalism. Like that's what interests me the most because
Wow.
I think it's an easier thing to comprehend from a Western mind standpoint that intaking a substance can have a physiological effect because we are used to
Right.
that with drugs and pharmaceuticals and the paradigm that we grew up in. It made a little more intuitive sense that I can consume something to have a physiological change. And
Right.
in addition to that, from my Irish, my Italian, and my black backgrounds, it's kind of sad, I guess is the best word I have, because I see how those cultures in America now still have some of their food therapies, still some have some of their food cultures, but I feel like so much of the medicinal aspects of them have kind of been stripped away. Because I do
Mm.
think that these cookings one time had a medicinal facet, like especially in black
Yeah.
cooking. I know that like these certain spices and herbs and things were utilized. Sometimes it was actually to invigorate and add heat because people of
Mm-hmm.
African descent come from an area where heat in their body was actually needed. So spicy
Yeah.
herbs were actually very medicinal and helpful in those regards. So I
Yeah.
think it's interesting to think that, all of this medicinal, the herbalism and food therapies were something that were inherent to all of our cultures, no matter where our backgrounds are. It just depends on how many
Definitely.
generations we have to trace those back because at one time they were the only outlet. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that I always like to point out while people think, well, the reason why we stopped using those is because they were primitive or they were not as superior to modern medicine or all of these things. I always pose
Mm-hmm.
the question is that modern medicine obviously has amazing, amazing pros that we know we have become leaps and bounds in, but we kind of have to forget that since the advent of modern medicine, life expectancy in plenty areas across the world has actually decreased, not increased. The quality of life has
Mm.
actually decreased, not increased. So to say that the practices of the past were actually primitive and less effective, I don't think that there's substantial evidence to support that. And in addition,
Right.
places like China and Asia and India, where they have a little bit more of an integrated system, they
Mm-hmm.
utilize these practices of herbalism and all of these traditional things, not because they're holding on to tradition and they want to stick with the old ways, because if they didn't work, they throw them away and do what we're doing as well because they have hard economies or they have communistic pressures and all these things. If the drug paradigm was the one that was most efficient, they would do that in a heartbeat. But they kept their
Yeah.
traditional ways because they were effective, because they were worked, and because they were able to be integrated.
Yeah.
Side tangent there, but I think it's important to be stated.
I love that. And, it makes me think about the ancient ancestors of Chinese medicine because many of them studied immortality and longevity. And if you could imagine centuries ago, many of these practitioners and people who practice Chinese medicine and, you know, they lived until hundreds of years, like
Yeah.
100 years, 120, like I know it's sort of hard for us to believe that because we're like, back then, we're so much more advanced now, but how do we actually really know based off of just of our limited understanding of the world now, right? And what we
Yeah.
can learn
No.
from books.
Well, and exactly. And you also hear like, oh, the life expectancy in the Middle Ages or something like that was 40 years old. Well, there's two things wrong with that statement. A, the Middle Ages or Dark Ages, or whatever word you want to call it, was a very tiny period of time in human history. It refers mostly to Europe, which we forget that there was five, six other continents with life on there at that time. And then lastly,
Yeah,
that average age of 40 was simply because there was such a high infant mortality rate. So when you average it out, yes, there's people dying at 1 years old and people dying at 90. So on average, it was about 45 years old. But if you made it
yeah,
past infancy, you usually live to be about 80 or 90 years old. So even that
yeah,
fact we have in our head that, like back in the Dark Ages, people weren't living as long, it is as accurate as a depiction. And then we look at cultures like you were just speaking of that aren't involved
yeah.
in that conversation, and that life expectancy can be almost double that.
Well, I do also want to say and talk about culture and talk about ancestral roots because many of these cultures that you had mentioned, like in India, in China, in many parts of Asia, in parts of Africa, like Egypt, many of these cultures who have these herbs and spices and plants that are embedded in their culture and their food, there is an innate trust because it's been passed down for generations and generations. These recipes, these understandings of what herbs and plants are doing in our body have been passed down and it's just common knowledge. Like when I think about Vietnamese culture, a lot of Vietnamese cuisine is like you get a bowl of pho or you get a bowl of, any sort of if you go to any Vietnamese restaurant and you order something, it'll have vegetables in it, most likely. And most times those vegetables will be medicinal in nature.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be cooling the body or it'll be mint or basil, something like that. But these herbs that have been infused in cuisine have been passed down for centuries. And I think, and many times when we eat those foods, like for me, when I eat those foods, that is innately, indirectly, and directly connecting me to my ancestors, connecting me to the past generation because they created and they ate the same herbs, they ate the same plants, they had the same biological constituents coming into their body and doing like similar things, right? So I think that in many ways, these herbs and plants, they pass down generational wisdom that is from the past. And I think we have a lot of trust in that. People who from that culture have a lot of trust in these plants and these herbs that they're familiar with because they've been passed down and because they've been eaten for hundreds and hundreds of years. So I think it's interesting because with the advent of modern medicine, it's sort of like there's been a lot of, I think, this energy of like, modern medicine, this ancient medicine is now alternative medicine. It's
Mm-hmm.
like this medicine that is kind of woo-woo and just based off of the past and ancestry. But that's been the medicine around for thousands of years. So in fact, that is the actual medicine that's been around. And if
Yeah.
you could say modern medicine, allopathic medicine is the alternative medicine to that.
Yeah,
And I
right.
think it's interesting. Yeah, go
And no,
ahead.
and I think that that's a beautiful way of stating that. And modern medicine is all about research, effectiveness, reproducibility, all of these things. And it's
Yeah,
ironic that if that is their truth, then you need to look at these ancient healing modalities in herbalism because they have thousands of years of reproducibility. They have thousands of years of evidence. They have
right.
thousands of years of being utilized in these fashions. So to write those off is very silly if we're going to use those thoughts and paradigms. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a perfect segue where I will go on my little bit of a tangent when, trying to explain to a patient the difference between a pharmaceutical agent and an herb. This is kind of the analogy and explanation I typically use. So when we look at pharmacological agents, they're typically an isolated compound, ironically, that does usually come from a plant. So they'll look at a plant or a substance and be like, all right, this is the active compound. This is the thing that does something. So they'll isolate it from this plant, and then therefore we're taking it in an incredibly high concentration because it's just one single compound that's isolated. So the beauty of that is it has a strong physiological effect because it's an isolated and highly concentrated compound. However, The problem with that is also that it has a strong physiological effect. And the reason why both of those things are true statements is that it's not a suggestion to the body to like, could you do this thing? Could you increase this process? It's a telling to the body, no, you're going to do this thing. No, you're going to increase this process. And let's say you
Yeah.
don't have the nutrients, the metabolic energy, the neurotransmitters, the whatever you have you to do this thing, it's still going to tell the body to do it anyhow. So it's a very forceful process when we take a pharmacological agent because it doesn't give the body a suggestion. And therefore, the side effect that you often see is usually because it's taxing the body somewhere because it wouldn't have done this thing without such a strong suggestion. And
Yeah.
so the opposite then therefore is true with herbals is that they're in a lot lower of a concentration. So it almost feels more of like a suggestion. It almost tells the body like, if you can do this, will you do this? And therefore it's not having this forceful component to it. And in addition, and this is the beauty of nature that I still, I won't even try to understand. A lot of the times, the constituent that is the active compound, when you take it in its herbal form, it comes with those nutrients. It comes with those vitamins and minerals that actually make it active and utilized in the body. So therefore, it's not
Mhm.
stripping it from other parts of the body. It's not taking it away from things because the herb itself has everything it needs for that component to work. And then the more beautiful thing is it usually has these phytochemicals or phenols or alkaloids that actually mitigate side effects as well. So ironically, the herb has its own built-in mechanism to avoid these things from happening. And I think that that is this beauty of what herbalism can do is it has already this package component that needs no alterations. And don't get me wrong, I'm not downplaying the effectiveness and the power of modern pharmaceuticals. Like I take an NSAID a couple times a month. I keep a Benadryl in my wallet because sometimes if I have really, really bad anxiety, it will help bring me down. So I'm not saying that these strong, forceful events aren't sometimes needed. It just shouldn't
Yeah.
be, I think, our default norm.
Yeah.
On that explanation I've given there, since you work with herbalism all the time, how do you feel about the way I explained that? Because I have thought about that quite often.
I love that so much. I think you really shared a lot of interesting points. And it's interesting because I think we have to look at one layer up, like a higher layer up of how drugs, in what environment, in what system were drugs created. And to me, it feels like it's a very young system, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
very much a scientific basis and a very reductionist way of thinking about the body. It's thinking each system is in a silo, each chemical is in a silo, all cells and things in the body are in its own structures and compartments and all these things. If you look at a system like Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, it's completely the opposite. Everything is connected. Every single cell, every single organ is connected to the other, right? And so there's no it's a system that's based on holism, holistic system, right? And so when you look at just those systems alone, and then you look at in which the way they use herbs, because all of it's herbalism, because what you're saying is drugs are created from these isolated chemical compounds that come from herbs, plants. So all of the drugs we're getting are basically coming from herbs, plants, fungi, right? Because penicillin originally comes from fungi. So we learn not only from plants, but we're learning from fungi, we're learning from mushrooms, we're learning from all sorts of other organisms outside of human organisms. But we have to understand that from those systems, it created how we relate to herbs. And if we're looking at it from an allopathic or modern medicine perspective, it's very young. It's very like, get straight to the point, get to the linear
Mm-hmm.
answer to this question, to this problem. But when we go at it from a more yin perspective of everything, it's a whole system, it's a whole ecosystem. So how can we use herbs and plants that are then speaking the same language of our body, which is when we take an herb, it's providing us the chemical constituents and all the other factors and compounds that help to kind of mitigate side effects and all of these things. You're taking the whole of the herb, which comes with that, and you're bringing that into your body. So it's definitely two ways of receiving medicine and herbs and plants. And into your body. It's definitely two different ways. And I think it has a lot to say with the two systems of medicine, this like
Yeah.
more holistic system or this more reductionist system. And again, I think you're right in that with the advent of modern medicine, that reductionist system, there has been a lot of advantages, right? Like that has a place and a time and responsibility when we use that medicine. It's amazing for emergencies. It's amazing, like, for me and you, like we're not we're not here to do surgeries, right? We're not here to do that emergency medicine. But what we can really help our patients and our clients with is being able to understand, okay, what's happening in your environment? What's happening inside the body? Can we investigate on these deeper levels of how these behaviors and conditions and imbalances came about over a long period of time? And Chinese medicine is really, really great at helping with those because it's a holistic system that's
Yeah.
asking questions from all these different perspectives and levels.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm going to pass it back to you
Yeah.
because I feel like you have a lot to say on this.
Yeah, no, there's several things, and I'll go back down to the reductionist system that is, allopathic medicine. It has this, tendency to again reduce things down to its systems. You have, the skeletal system, you have the muscular system, you have this, that, and the other. And I think that people that are so ingrained in allopathic medicine, they think that these systems are real things. And what I mean by that, they think that there's a system in the body that is the skeletal system. And I'll be like, yes, there is a system in the body that's composed of bones, but it's not, there is no singular thing that exists as a skeletal system. This is a whole system. The way we reduce these systems into compartments and parts was just our own lens that we're putting on physiology. So not every other healing modality and system then was going to be as reductionist or understand the body in that way. And they understood the body as that you can't look at something in a single fashion because then therefore you are only trying to address one thing. One thing is never addressed alone. It's almost the example, and I like ecosystem to be the best. It's like when you bring in an invasive species to help, let's say, handle a problem of like insect infestation. That's a classic example used in biology. Well, when you bring in this invasive species to start killing off this insect, well, there's nothing that's regulating that invasive species, so therefore that species starts getting out crazy, and all the insects it kills was helping with this thing, so therefore now all these plants start dying, and now this starts overgrowing, and again, you're never isolating one singular component because we do work in these ecosystems, if you will. And then another thing I like to explain, because herbalism in the Western model has been utilized with allopathic principles, and that's why it isn't as effective as it could be, because you're using practice from a different discipline and understanding and applying it to a model that was never utilized in. So
Mm,
a big
yeah,
mistake I often see is with herbals, we'll be like, well, what herbs are good for high blood pressure? Let's use that as an example. They'll be like, well, this herb is good for high blood pressure, and they'll give it to 20 people with high blood pressure, and only 5 people will get better. And well, the
yeah,
reason is because that herb isn't good for high blood pressure. That herb might be good for increasing circulation throughout the body. So let's say the
mm-hmm,
person's problem of high blood pressure was directly related to that. Yeah, those 5 people are going to get better. But if the problem they had high blood pressure was from either a kidney issue, a congenital heart problem, or from something else, it's not going to
yeah,
address high blood pressure. So we need to stop using
right,
that Western lens. And then another additional thing, which we have contrasting opinions on, one of the strengths of Chinese herbal medicine is you rarely utilize an herbal by itself. You usually utilize an herbal with several other herbals, and I think this is the beauty and the intelligence of Chinese medicine. You'll throw, let's say, 5 herbs at something at one time. 3 of the herbs are going to be doing the same thing. So they're going to have a synergistic effect. They're
yeah,
going to be hitting a similar pathway, so that strength is then increased. Then we throw a 4th herb in there to mitigate any potential side effects from these 3 herbs. And we throw a 5th herb
mm-hmm,
in there to increase its bioavailability, maybe help with intake in the digestive system, maybe help with it being transported to the right place. So you're using these 5
mm-hmm,
separate herbal components to do some real magic. And that's a problem that the West hasn't caught up on, is we can't just throw these individual herbs, individual problems, and understand this in a reductionist fashion, because the system was never meant to
right.
be understood that way.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that, you're recognizing that, because I think many ways with the Western frame of thinking, we think we see this problem. What is the one thing I can use to tackle that problem? And I get that question a lot when people ask, like, oh, what's the thing that I can do to help, solve my endometriosis? And I'm like, well, it's so much deeper than that, right? We have to go deeper into the root cause and all of the different things that are causing that environment to be created in your body. It's not just
Yeah.
about this one thing and then one thing can solve that problem. It's still thinking in that Western point of view of like this one size fits all solution to everything. So I think it's interesting too, because it's interesting because we do have like in some ways a contrasting view on the single herb usage. I think for me, in my personal experience, I've learned that it's actually what I've felt in my own practice, in my own experience of taking herbs, is when we can develop a relationship with just one herb, I think that is sometimes better than taking like 10 herbs at a time. Just because so much of our life nowadays is so stimulating, like so much of the food we eat and the things we hear in social media and like things that are happening in our daily lives, like it's so jam-packed already that I think sometimes if we can work with an herbalist or work with somebody that can recommend us, okay, based off of your root cause, your root imbalance, what is one herb that you can start to work with, that you can start to develop a relationship with? Because I do also believe that our herbs and plants are working not only on a physical, biological, chemical, physiological level, it's also working on a mental, emotional, chi based level, an energetic
Yeah.
level, and on a spiritual level. Because if you look at nature, nature is life, right? It's moving, it's composting, it has all sorts of organisms growing within it, right? So it's like it's teeming with life. If we have that same reverence for our body that we do for nature and nature for our own bodies, then we can understand that nature itself has spirit and nature is spirit. And
Yeah.
so if we have that understanding, like the ancient Chinese believe this, the Native Americans believe in animus, which is nature and spirit are one. Our bodies and nature are one, so thus we are spirit. If we come in with that same understanding that herbs and plants, the things that we take into our body is helping us on, again, a spiritual level as well, I think we would want to sort of simplify our practice
Yeah.
and really start to just understand something on a deep level. And we can do that, especially in our modern time with so much stimulation. We can do that by simplifying our practice and just saying, what is my relationship with this one herb? And you can start with an herb that is relatively harmless, you could say. But you could start with a mint, right? You could start with a ginger. You can start with like basic kitchen herbs that you have, just things that are basically your food. And your food is your number one medicine
Yeah.
anyways, but if you start with something small and you work at it with small dosages and you start to understand the communication that your body has with this herb, because that I think is more important too. Knowing your body is more important than what these herbs can do for your body.
Mm.
If you know what your body is telling you, if you can understand that, oh, wow, okay, I'm actually feeling like I'm coming down with something, or my body's sort of telling me to eat more of this food or telling me not to eat more of this food, that is more important than you taking in these herbs or you taking in these drugs that can help you fix that problem. I'm not saying don't take those things. I'm not saying don't follow the advice of your medical professionals and herbalists and things. I'm just saying developing a relationship with the communication that your body is sending you is so, so important when you're doing the healing work for yourself. Because that has been my experience for sure, is like
Yeah.
learning how to listen, learning how to learn the body intuition, and then use that also to understand my relationship with herbs and plants and food. And that actually helps me strengthen how I know when to take these herbs. Like I've sort of cultivated that enough, my body intuition enough to start to say, okay, actually, I think right now in this moment of time, I need to take more ginger, or I need to do an herbal steam with lemongrass, or I do need to work more with mugwort in this time because my body is telling me and signaling to me, okay, it's time. I'm ready
Yeah.
for this. And I think we just get better with that over time. But again, my main point here is developing a relationship with an herb. And then once you've solidified a relationship with that herb, it's like developing friendships. We don't want to like jump into a community and make friends with like 50 people at one time. We want to start with like one or two or three people, and then we want to build and build and build and build,
Yeah.
because then that's more sustainable for us long term. And also my last point here is I have um I have gone on the journey of taking these huge Chinese herbal from formulas, like 15, 20 herbs, and I'll go home and decoct these raw herbs and drink this like dirt sludge. Yes, it's super medicinal. It's super healing for my body. I actually got really great results from that. And at the same time, I did have side effects. Like I had difficult digesting, and I had constipation, I had digestive issues, like all those things that come with if you take so much herbs, it can have a really strong effect on your body as well,
Yeah.
because I think, and also in our modern day, our gut health is always shifting and changing with all the things. And so I suggest to people like start with one herb because of your gut biome, but your gut biome and your gut health sometimes doesn't have enough chi and life force to handle 15 herbs at one time. So
Yeah.
yeah. Any thoughts on that, Jordan?
Yeah, no, and I think that I'll compromise. I'll meet you midway. And I think that, the long-term plan, because I've gotten to a point where, those formulas I was talking about for my asthma, my celiacs, and my Crohn's that like literally were
Hmm.
life-changing.
Yeah.
I think that strength, that method, and that was what was needed in the time. And it's funny because now that I'm in more of a place of homeostasis, I've been backing down and doing just that, like working with single herbs, trying to find
Hmm.
just like the one thing that can kind of maybe adjust things in one direction or one way. So
Hmm.
I will kind of say that I think when you're trying to use herbalism in some Western standpoints of getting rid of the a strong disease or getting you out of a fight or flight or getting you out of this strong process, sometimes that
Hmm.
force or strength is needed, but that
Yeah.
should not be the long term plan. The long term plan should
Yes.
be a more yin plan, should be a more slow plan, should be a more plan that is more relationship based and getting to learn your body and
Right.
building up these strengths in that way. And I think
Right.
another important thing is you kind of talked to about the spiritual, the mental, emotional aspects and the relationship with these plants. And I, strongly believe in and wholeheartedly take into account everything you just stated there. And I think a better way for people to understand this, to have more of a, left-brained biological standpoint and understanding. We talked about this a little bit beforehand. Is that why would plants create constituents, components, and things that help humans? Did they have that conscious awareness to that? Maybe. But when we just look at evolutionarily wise and speaking, plants realized, we'll use that as the terminology, that in order to evolve, and in order to stay propagated, that another great vehicle for doing this, for either spreading their seeds or spreading their crop, is utilizing animals. So they
Hmm.
produce substances and constituents that help an animal thrive. That animal then, therefore, will then cultivate it. That animal will then, therefore, make sure it survives. So
Hmm.
animals or plants were smart in that sense than to create things that make us healthier, that make us
Yeah.
better, that make us want to keep them alive as well. So it's interesting how intelligent plant life is when we look at it from that standpoint. And it's
Yeah.
really, really striving to keep us alive and healthy because at the end of the day, we're important to it in some aspects. And be careful, it might try killing us off if we can completely do bad things to it as well. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that. I think I actually took a plant spirit herbalism class like years ago. And in that class, we were working with the spirit of chamomile. And the woman took us on a shamanic journey with this plant. And she asked us at the end, like, okay, everyone, so we take plants for their benefit for our bodies, right? But what do we give plants? And everyone said their answer, and everyone was like, we give plants, we plant them and we give them new places and we grow them and all these things. And people said we give them our attention, our love, and all, all that. And she said, okay, all those answers are great, but this is what we really give plants. We give them a new vehicle for life. And that really struck me. And that stayed with me ever since because it really takes us out of the human centric way of thinking about life because we're not just the only like organisms living on this planet. It's like other organisms as well. And who's to say that we are just like totally a part of the plant's plans, you know? And
Yeah.
so I think that in many ways we can think about these plants as our allies, walking the path with us to co-creating beauty on this planet. And I think plants and fungi and, water and all the elements are a part of that
Yeah.
for us to create more life, for us to create more happiness, for us to create more health and balance on this planet. And I think when we are called to a plant or when we are called to take an herb, I think we have to listen to that call because there's something deeper in that. Like our bodies maybe need that on a chemical level, but I think in some ways we are also learning from plants. We're learning from their wisdom because plants and herbs are our ancestors. Like plants have been around for much longer than humans. And so I feel like there is something also that plants and you could say the earth is teaching us through these plants. And if we are able to cultivate that practice of like deep listening and relationship with plants, like I think that can take us to a whole nother level of like herbalism.
Well, no, and it's funny that you say that like plants that we are a vehicle for plants, and it's like it's no different than the thought that we actually can contain more bacterial cells than we do human cells. So technically, we're just a
Mm,
vehicle for bacteria. They might be utilizing us as their
totally.
conduit as well. So it's not that abstract of a thought to think that plants might be doing the same. And I think
Yeah.
this is a perfect segue to asking you. I think I have a twofold question. We'll kind of pass this back and forth some of your favorite herbs to work with and utilize and things like that. I'd
Mm-hmm.
like at least like a 1 to 3 of your favorite herbs. And then another thing that I
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure we don't forget to discuss, and maybe I'll just make the statement now, if it comes back later, we can, is that another thing that's incredibly powerful, and this goes with both food therapy and herbal therapy, is a lot of people will ask, well, what's the best herb or plant for me or these situations, and what diet should I be taking, and all of these things. It's incredibly important to try to look at the area in which you are living when making that decision
Mm,
because the foods that are native to that area, the plants that are native to that area, the herbs that are native to that area were therefore cultivated and came about to be because they're probably conducive and healthy for the life that was there. And so I always use this
totally.
example of, the Mediterranean diet was all the rage at one time, when I was growing up, the early 2000s, and everyone was like
Yeah.
trying, like, I'm into the Mediterranean diet. This is great for me because people in the Mediterranean live long lives and they're healthy and all these things. And they started doing studies on it about people doing it here and in these places. And like we're not finding great outcomes and variables and they were not seeing it as being as helpful. And I think the thing they didn't take into consideration is America is not the Mediterranean. We don't
Right.
have the same weather patterns. We don't have the same metabolic needs. We don't have the same outputs. And so therefore, of course, those things are not going to be assisting and helpful for us. And I, of
Mm-hmm.
course, know that you already agree with this concept because you're the one that planted the seed for me to begin with. So, bringing it back, if there's anything you want to add to that, great. If not, just to some of the herbs that you
Yeah,
enjoy
I'd love to
using.
add on that. I was reading this book called Plant Spirit Medicine here. Of course, I read many, all sorts of books. But that book, Elliot Cohen talks about that book, and he says that the plants that live and that grow next to you or native to you around your area are actually 100 more times potent and effective for your body than other plants that you take that are around foreign plants. And that just makes so much sense because the plants that are around your area are suited for the environment in which you live in. And so it's really interesting. I remember doing research on ancestral foods and, how food ancestry is connected to different parts of the world. And I was looking at this map of India and how like in the northern part of India, they eat more warming foods because it's more mountainous, right? They need more of that like heating type of quality. But if you go more down to the tropics, they eat more like damp clearing foods. And so it's like if you're in the more tropic areas, you're going to want more bitters. You're going to want more damp clearing foods. But if you're more in the mountainous areas, you are going to want more like warming, more like chi moving foods because that's what is important for the area. So your environment has so much to do with the herbs you're taking, with like what you're taking into your body because you are of that environment. And so I think it's such an important topic and such an important point to make there.
Can I also
And
add real
yeah,
quick?
please.
And I think this part I didn't mention is not only the environment. I think that that's maybe one or two on this list. I think another important thing is the environment in which your ancestry comes from as well too. So
Yeah.
if you are, let's say, a black person, then like African herbs and cuisine. If you are an Asian person, because also our
Mm-hmm.
biology had thousands or hundreds of thousands of years of evolving to those lands, so they probably were
Yeah.
able to incorporate and utilize those. And sorry to cut you off there, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean it's such a big thing to talk about food ancestry and the food that is is going to be nourishing for your constitution and based off of where your ancestors are from. Like for example, when I went to Vietnam earlier this year, I could go out and eat like a bowl of like noodles and it has like fresh vegetables and just, some tofu, and that would just be so nourishing for me. And then like for my partner, his ancestors come from like Germany and Europe. And so when he's eating that, he's like, I don't that's not what I want to eat in the mornings. Like I want to eat oatmeal and all these things and I'm just like, no, like I'm such more of a savory eater in all parts of the day. Like I'm not really a big fan of like eating sweets in the morning. And I think that just innately comes from because my ancestors grew up eating those same foods all the time. So like that's the food that like I align to and that nourishes me. So I think that's a really important part. It's like and I also want to say it's the enjoyment that you have with eating food too. Like that is a
Mm.
huge part of the chi in which you take in from food. It's the enjoyment of it. If you're eating food that you don't enjoy, like it doesn't spark you. If you're eating like the same things all the time, I think try to find some ways to add more enjoyment in your food, whether it's like you cooked it or you're trying a new recipe or like you're trying a different restaurant or maybe you're trying a new cuisine you've never, had before. I think like that is a huge part of taking food as medicine. It's like the
Yeah.
enjoyment that you have with it. So, I'm going to dive into the herbs that I love, the herbs that I'm working with. I'm going to talk about an herb that I think many, many people use that we don't really know as herbs, but we just know as tea. It's called lucha or gyasun, which is essentially green tea in
Oh, okay.
in all.
Thank you for that, because I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, no, but that's what we call it in Chinese.
Okay.
Like, we call it lucha, which is essentially green tea. And green tea is in Chinese medicine, green tea was used a lot. And in some herbal formulas, it's used as sort of like a carrier herb for
Mm.
other herbs to come on with it. But we use it most commonly as a beverage nowadays. But it has very strong medicinal properties to it. So it clears heat in the body. It helps to lightly detox the body because of its high amounts of antioxidants. And so something as simple as a green tea is so like yummy and so effective as just using as a single herb because it's food, right? It's something that we just take on a daily basis and it can actually help us clear a lot of heat and toxins that we get from just like our daily lives. So I usually drink some tea after I've had a meal just to kind of help me process. And also I work with different teas as well. Like so green tea is you're working with the same plant. It's like Camellia sinensis.
Mhm.
And if it's processed differently, it becomes different it has different properties. So it turns into oolong or it turns into red tea, depending
Um,
on how it's processed. So if you're drinking an oolong, it's processed differently based off of like a um versus if you have.
so do you know if are any of those versions, because you just said green tea is more cooling, and we're
Yep.
at least we are physically entering into cooler months. So is there any that are opposite that
hmm
are like more warming that you work with? I'm just curious there.
Yes, definitely. I would say, especially during fall and winter time, drink more of a pu'er tea or drink more of an oolong because it's a little bit more warming. Those are pu'er tea is actually fermented, so it has that fermentation, that heat of the fermentation in it, and it brings more of those properties of cooling to the body or warming to the body. And if when you ferment it, it actually has probiotics and prebiotics. So it's going to help with the digestive health and all of that goodness. So that's one herb that I love working with. I work with that herb on a daily basis because it's one of my favorites. And then I also love one herb that's coming up with me, which I worked a lot with when I was in school for anxiety and for stress and depression, is
Oh, we all need
chamomile.
help there.
Well, yes, but definitely this is one herb that I always went back to all the time was like, I'm going to drink chamomile. That's like my tried and true. I do want to say if you are taking SSRIs, if you are taking antidepressants and things like that, you do want to be cautious with taking chamomile as well because it does have some bioconstituents in it that could affect that. But again, if you're taking it in very, very small dosages and you are taking it as a beverage, it's a lovely, lovely herb to work with. And that's one of my favorites as well. And then I do love working with like lemongrass, mugwort, and I put that all in a herbal steam and I steam with it and it just is the best. And one of the things that you can do with an herbal steam is you can use it as an herbal wash for your body. And that's very cooling and that's very like helps with relieving pain and all of the things. So it's really, really great to do those things or create an herbal bath with it. So those are the herbs that I'm thinking on the top of my head. What about you, Jordan?
Yeah, no. It's funny how different my answer is going to be because, and this is what I love about this conversation and us. Like you can really see our yin and yang nature. Like you have a way better grasp on the yin nature of things. And I'm always overly young and trying to bring it back down, and that's why I'm always looking for the balance. And so thank you for that.
Mm,
The first herb I'm going to actually talk about is, of course, a very young herb. In essence, it's going to be huang, which is astragalus root. And it's one that I've had to find balance in the relationship with it because it is such a young herb. And I'm always trying to become overly young and I need my balance there. So it's an herb that is said to be assisting to cognition, to thought, to mental activity. It's a space that I'm in more times than not. And in doing so, it has helped to be stimulating to the digestive system because it said that, if our digestion isn't firing and doing these things, we won't have that mental activity to be able to go. And it's one of those things where I've gone back and forth between like, no, I need to stop taking this herb completely. It's, I'm overusing it, et cetera, to then finding, what? No, this is an herbal constituent. There's a way worse things that I could be taking to, supplement what I'm doing. So I've been trying to find that natural balance with the herb because it does help me, when I'm having depressive states, it helps lift my mood. When I am lacking
hmm
clarity, it does help with those things. So I just always now am cautious that when I'm taking it, I am making sure I'm up on my rest. I'm up on my hearty foods. I'm up on
hmm
taking, maybe a medicinal that's grounding and nurturing and maybe taking a little bit extra vitamins that day to make sure I
hmm
am contrasting that. So Huang Chi is one of my favorites there. I'm just going to throw onto it Ren Shen then is as well, ginseng, which is an herb that's also incredibly stimulating
Super young.
and doing very similar things to that. So I'm not going to go into explaining that any further, but just saying that I have been trying to do those exact opposite things with it because of those reasons. And one of the
Mm,
herbs that is its opposition that I've been working with a lot now is Shudiwang or Romania. And that's one that I have been trying to do, form this relationship that you're saying, and taking as a
hmm
single herb because it is this black tarry substance. It just has like that feeling of like pure yin to it,
Yeah.
and it's something that I need. And ironically, up until very recently, I have not been able to take it because instantly shut my system down. It was too cloying, too thick, too all of these
Mm-hmm.
things. And now I'm in a place where I can digest it and absorb it. I think that my body is finally ready to like start incorporating in, to start slowing down, to
Mm.
start finding this balance. So I'm really, really excited to have the ability to intake the substance because I haven't even had the ability to do that for some time past.
Wow, that's
Um,
beautiful.
and I think
Yeah,
one of the last herbs I want to like touch base on just thought wise, actually there's two. Ginger is like one of the greatest starter herbs for anyone in this thing as well. Because it helps
totally.
increase digestive. It's a pre and probiotic, has all those good things. There's plenty of avenues of taking it. But an
Mm-hmm.
herb I want to give warning to, that's actually where I wanted to end my rant with, is ashwagandha, which isn't an
Mm.
herb that is in our in Chinese medicine, so I have expertise from that lens. But it's an herb that, for whatever reason, has just like taken such a stronghold in pop culture and herbalism right now.
Yeah.
Caution I want to take, and this is a caution I have for herbs in general, but the caution with ashwagandha I want to take is it's a major regulator, and adaptogen is the word we use in the West. But because it is such an adaptogen, that can mean very certain things for different people. If you are a person that's like Jordan, who is high strung, high go, high energy almost all the time, taking an adaptogen which brings you down, therefore, can cause mild bouts of depression, can bring you down a little bit lower than you want or need to be. And so the
Mm-hmm.
opposite is true for someone who is a little bit more yin. That herb can almost bring you up a little bit too high to where you feel a little bit manic or out of your body and all of these things. And so that's why
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to end on this note that herbals are incredibly powerful. They're incredibly unique substances that need A, our respect, but B, find a freaking herbalist. I know that like it
Yeah.
seems like I'm just promoting myself and that's hi, I'm an herbalist. But that being said, I'm so serious in that statement because these things are so transformative and so powerful. And here in the West, we're
Mm.
utilizing them so haphazardly. Everyone has a cabinet of like 1,000 herbs or supplements that they're just taking every day. And it's like, you need
Mm-hmm.
to A, have respect for that, but also B, have a deeper understanding of what this is doing to your body because some of these problems you might be having might be side effects of those things you're taking without being conscious
Totally.
of.
Yeah, I'm gonna add to the some of the herbs you had mentioned here. Huang Chi or astragalus root is one of my favorite herbs too. Like I worked with Huang Chi for a long time when I was in school, and it's a wonderful herb for the immune system. Like it's so great at modulating the immune system. The ancient Chinese, they would use Huang Qi alone just to help with as an antiviral during like times of an epidemic, and it was super effective for that. And also just all the things you talked about with Huang Qi, seriously, like such a good herb. And also, yes, if you are thinking about like diving into any of these herbs, definitely consult with an herbalist, definitely consult with like a practitioner that is really immersed in like really steeped and immersed in herbalism and uses herbs and talks that language and can help you understand what is the root cause and what herbs could be really powerful to help you shift that root cause, and not just herbs that you're like doing research on the internet and then you're like, I'm just going to take them because I think it sounds good for me. Like definitely be cautious with some of the herbs that you take, also because some of the herbs that you take might be contraindicated for like some of the medications you take and all of those things, so it might even cause some like complications. So just be cautious with what you do take in, and ask for support, ask for help. And also some herbs, as you were speaking, I was like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about reishi, like different herbs within
Mm.
Chinese medicine that we use that can be really helpful, and that I love working with is reishi. I've worked a lot with like lotus root, lotus seed as well. And yeah, I mean, just the food that you have in your house, in your fridge, the vegetables that you buy, though that is also your medicine. I mean, that is like we think of ginger as like a staple thing in herbalism, but it's also a food, right? You can make ginger tea, or you can add it to soups, or all these things. Like your food is your number one medicine, especially when it comes to healing your body, because you take in your food 2 3 times a day, but maybe you'll take in your herbs like once a day, 2 times a day. You know, if
And
you're
then
if
Yeah, no, and then also the difference by volume. Of course, your food is just such a greater volume, so if that could be medicinal in
Yeah.
its fashion, then it has that much greater of effect. So absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, any last words on herbalism, Jordan?
That is a great question. So I think to recap, finding herbals, foods, medicinals that are either prone to your ancestry, so where your ancestry comes from, in addition to local to your land, is incredibly important. It's
Mm-hmm.
incredibly important to work with somebody who knows what they're doing, especially if you're taking these at higher doses for long periods of time or in a certain way that isn't just, in a tea form or something along those lines. And
Mm-hmm.
lastly, have this be you can make this a very ritualistic process, make it fun. Find a way to
Yes.
incorporate it in a sense that takes some of the seriousness that we just brought into it away from it. So
Right.
I think
Right.
that's where I'd wrap up there for
The
sure.
last thing I'm going to add to that is ask your parents, ask your elders,
Mm,
because they have some steeped wisdom in working with plants and herbs and foods, especially the people that came before us who are who love cooking, who love,
yeah,
being that they can share with us that we might not be able to find in a textbook or with an herbalist that we work with. But if we want to understand the generational wisdom that lives within us, we ask the people who are around us, our
yeah,
families, and the environment in which our ancestors are from. And I think there's a lot of wisdom that we can learn from doing that. So, yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you everyone who tuned in with us today to talk about herbalism, to learn about herbalism. And we are excited to release more episodes. So if you have any thoughts or any questions or any like feedback even on the podcast, reach out to us or you can provide us some feedback and we will find you and catch you on the next episode. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.